We're joined by Jan-Jan, who will be speaking to us on the matters that continue within the ANC. Rather, these are all related to the ANC's succession battle. Jan-Jan, good afternoon. Thank you very much for your time. Now, in as much as some have said it's too soon, but most media publications are littered with articles around the succession battles within the ANC, either it be at a regional level, provincial, and even national. Firstly, just give me your views. Is it in fact too soon?
Good afternoon, Fundo, and good afternoon to all our viewers. I think it might be too soon to draw any lasting conclusions, but not too soon to start speculating and to start watching people. I mean, there's no doubt that Lindiwe Sisulu has entered the race. There's also no doubt that President Ramaphosa is in the race, given the endorsements that we are seeing from Limpopo and the Northern Cape. So yes, the race has started. We need to look at it, but that race has not been decided yet.
And then to the candidates themselves, let's start with Gauteng. Anyone coming into that position, one would say, must deal with the electoral decline that they have suffered over the years. We're hearing of Panyaza Lesufi possibly succeeding, Makhura, and we're also hearing of Lebogang Maile possibly deputizing. But then there's also the element of another candidate that many have not been speaking of, Park Stawu, in that mix. Just talk to me about Panyaza first. Would he be the right candidate to succeed Makhura at this point?
Well, firstly, yes, Gauteng has been in decline, and they are somewhat overrepresented at the national level, seeing that Mr. Mantashe, the national chair, the president of the ANC, Mr. Ramaphosa, and the DSG, the Deputy Secretary General, are actually de facto all from Gauteng. They all live in Gauteng province. So they might be somewhat overrepresented. What you are referring to is the battle to succeed David Makhura, the current premier.
Yes.
And the names mentioned are those that you said. I would say that between Mahile and Lesufi, both have a few skeletons in the cupboard. In the case of Mr. Lesufi, he oversaw the frankly disastrous Gauteng system for registering your children to go to school early, and that's been a complete mess, as we know. And secondly, he has certainly angered many schools with the way in which he deals with schools, which is very hands-on, you could say, or that would be the positive way, or the negative way of looking at it is that he interferes in the work of school governing bodies and schools. In the case of Mr. Mahile, he, of course, was the mastermind against the quite frankly illegal effort to undermine the Tshwane Metro, where he lost many a court case and where, in the end, the Gauteng taxpayer had to pay for a completely unnecessary bit of legal lawfare, as they say, and in the end he lost in the Constitutional Court. So point being this, that neither of those two candidates have a clean slate, but both will contest, and in the end, as Bill Clinton said, it's a matter of compared to what. They are the people in the battle, and we shall see who succeeds Mr. Makhura. I think strength to both their arms, but it is a contest without a clear favourite at the moment.
Jan-Jan, in the ordinary world, how you conduct yourself in government should impact perhaps your fortunes in the political party, but sometimes it's the other way around. How strong you are in the political party decides if you'll actually be appointed to government. So if we had to confine ourselves to the politics, though, how strong of a contender is a gentleman such as Lesufi and as well as Mahile in terms of their political clout? Because it seems sometimes it's not as balanced as we think.
Well, I don't know who we might be in this case. In the end, what we think must be informed by the facts on the ground. Now, how these things are decided are at these party conferences where, in the end, the branch the elective members of the branch will decide what the branch does and will then deputize someone to take part in these conferences and vote, hopefully, as the branch decided. In the end, it's a secret ballot, but normally 90% of the delegates are from branch level. So how you conduct yourself in public and how you conduct yourself in politics might be important, but most important is where your support lies and whether you can galvanize that support. That would be, in the end, what decides the winning margin and the winner itself.
There are also reports suggesting that the current Premier, David Makhura, could possibly be promoted to national and even getting the seat on the top six as a Secretary General. Do you believe he wields that kind of influence nationally?
No, I do not. I think that, as I said before, Gauteng is absolutely overrepresented at the national level, especially for a province in such decline. I would think, and there's every indication, that the provinces in which the ANC remains strong also want to field a candidate for that very important Secretary General position, which, as we know, is currently de facto vacant because the current incumbent, Mr. Makhura, has some problems to deal with. And what we've heard is that Mpumalanga might be ready for the pounce, and that it might be the cat from Mpumalanga, David Mabusa, who might be interested in that position. The SG position is certainly a more powerful position than the deputy presidential position, especially if Mr. Mabusa retains presidential ambitions, which I'm sure he does. It's best to launch them from that pad, because in the end, the Secretary General has a large say in branch structures, and it's those branch structures who decide who gets nominated to actually attend the conferences where these leaders are chosen.
Speaking of David Mabusa, he's one man where many have said he keeps his cards very close to his chest, so you never really know. But if we were to be realistic and just assess the Mpumalanga landscape right now, if we had to look, we have Refilwe Mtheni there at the helm. They don't have a chair as yet in Mpumalanga. It's been left vacant by him. But can we say he still wields that type of political influence, or has that clout or constituency, honestly, to take him to that position of perhaps Secretary General nationally?
I think he must be a strong contender, especially if he decides to stand back from the deputy presidency and opens up that space for someone else. That buys him a lot of clout. In Mpumalanga, things have been somewhat messed up, quite frankly, and that's one of the reasons why that chairman's position has not been filled. Also, we remember that in the run-up to the previous conference at Nasrec, there was some unhappiness with some branches in Mpumalanga and how they were constituted and that they were constituted. So Mpumalanga is a province which is often somewhat unclear, to put it very lightly and very kindly. But I think should Mr. Mabusa actually start using the clout that he does have in that province, he should have no problem with in the end, galvanizing support. And secondly, he should be in a position where he might be challenging for national colors, simply because Mpumalanga also wants some positions.
But, you know, I'm not getting a proper answer from you on this one. You're saying Mpumalanga remains unclear. Do you think that he can consolidate power? Because, as we've seen, you have to bring something to the table, which is numbers on that slate, if you are to emerge as well. So if Mpumalanga has not been consolidated, perhaps by the current leadership, because there is kind of no leadership at this point. So does he have a base there? Does he have maybe half of the province insofar as the branches are concerned?
Look, the way these things play out, Mpumalanga in itself will not decide the result. In the previous conference, Mpumalanga held the balance of power because the contest was so close. So Mpumalanga itself will not provide him with enough of a base, but of course he has massive name recognition. And in the end, how this will play out will be a battle nationally between Mr. Ramaphosa's faction and the RET faction. So Mr. Mabusa would have to align himself with either or do what he did in 2017, which was to hold the balance of power, where he himself didn't have such a massive base. But he held the balance of power, and when he shifted that from the RET faction, that so-called unity ticket, if people recall, from the RET faction to Mr. Ramaphosa, that made the difference. His own core constituency and whether that has a national footprint has always been in doubt. And quite frankly, his performance as deputy president, of course, has been less than spectacular. Every time the heat is on, he's somehow ill or out of the country and then comes back and doesn't impress in parliament. He hardly ever answers a question in any way that anyone can understand. So to the extent that the EFF has asked that the number of questions to him be limited, seeing that it serves no purpose. So he hasn't been strong as a deputy president, but he is a very good tactician. That we saw in 2017. And he might well be one again, and he's sure to challenge, otherwise he has to drive into the sunset, and no politician likes that.
No, it's honestly going to be an interesting race. Just to close off now, perhaps with Gwede Mantashe, the chair. He's somewhat been, as some have said, defining himself outside of the Ramaphosa faction, according to some, if we are to look at some of his public utterances now, be it around the state capture report, and it seems even on Lindiwe Sisulu. What do you make of his candidacy? Do you see him perhaps taking over as deputy, or perhaps contesting for president, or remaining on that slate as it was before?
I think that's a very interesting question, which in the end you can ask Mr. Mantashe and you can get the answer you want to believe. But what is true is that he has been moving away from completely following the president, and there's another issue on which he's been vocal. He's been very unhappy with the energy issue. He is very much pro-nuclear, and he's been unhappy with the way in which these things have been handled with the independent power producers and how they've been let in with the 100 megawatt ability that's been given to people to self-generate. Very unhappy with that. He's also, he's been ambivalent about Lindiwe Sisulu, and he has been very unhappy with the Zondo report, where, of course, he himself is in serious danger of being in some trouble given his Bosasa ties. So that's perhaps understandable. But the fact that it's so voluble, that's the interesting part. And the fact is that he is certainly placing himself out there to be courted by either side. If he were to decide to run for any position on the Ramaphosa ticket, nevertheless, they'll be only too happy. Mr. Mantashe has his own constituency. It's not only an Eastern Cape constituency, which is where he originally comes from. He has always done well in the national elections in the ANC, and he's often sent to sort out problems when they occur. So I think he's a strong candidate. He might well be a successful candidate, and he will be a candidate that the Ramaphosa grouping specifically would very much like to have on their side and on their slate. But that might cause them to rethink some issues. And once they capitulate, for instance, on the Zondo issue, that becomes problematic, because that, quite frankly, is their defining characteristic. They keep campaigning for a cleaner ANC and a cleaner government. That'd be very tough to do if you're going to decide to implement the Zondo Commission report only to a certain extent, and to not implement it where certain individuals, very powerful individuals such as Mr. Mantashe, might well come into the fray. If you're going to leave that out, you're going to undermine your whole legitimacy as a fighter for a cleaner administration. That is, if it comes into the fray. We haven't seen the Zondo report dealing with that yet, but certainly there was some very damaging evidence given.